I pulled into the driveway, the tires crunching against the gravel. My neighbor had called me only an hour earlier, whispering over the line that she'd seen people moving boxes into my house. My house. I left the conference early, heart pounding the whole drive back, praying she was wrong. But when I stepped onto the porch, I froze. There they were, Adrian, my only son, standing tall in the doorway, with his wife and children cartons stacked behind them as if they belonged. His eyes met mine, without a trace of shame. "You don't even have a family," he said flatly, his voice cold enough to burn. "We're taking the house." For a moment, the world tilted. The weight of those words was heavier than the suitcase I still carried from the trip. I had been erased in a single sentence. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. I stepped inside. They went on, unpacking the children, running down the hallway, as if it were already theirs. My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes, directing them to the boxes, giving orders, like a woman settling into a new home. Adrian's back was stiff, his tone already dismissive, as if I were just an inconvenience they had to move around. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he could forget the nights I stayed awake, to pay bills, the years I gave up, so he could have his future. But no words came. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and dialed 3 numbers. My voice was steady when I spoke. "Yes, this is Calvera Morgan. I need officers at my address. Now." Adrian's head jerked toward me, a flicker of surprise breaking through his mask. My daughter-in-law's lips parted, but no sound escaped. The children's laughter faded into uneasy silence. I stood straighter, breathing evenly, watching my son realize this wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. And that's when I knew this battle had just begun. Most mornings in Vermont begin the same. The kettle whistles, the smell of dark roast fills the kitchen, and I take my mug to the window overlooking the garden. I like the stillness, the kind that lets you hear the bees if you stand outside long enough. My neighbors wave when they pass their dogs tugging on leashes, but they don't linger. We live side by side, friendly but private, each keeping our stories to ourselves. I'd grown used to that rhythm. After Adrian moved out years ago and my husband passed, silence became my closest companion. Some mornings, I would set 2 cups on the table by mistake, out of habit, then put one back in the cupboard before anyone noticed. Other days, I'd write birthday cards to family members I rarely heard from, choosing each word carefully, even though I knew the envelopes might end up in a drawer or the trash. The garden has been my anchor. Kneeling in the soil, coaxing life from seeds, gave me something to hold on to when loneliness pressed too close. The tomatoes, the rows of beans, the stubborn roses at the edge of the fence. They listened without judgment. I often thought of the house the same way, a quiet witness, faithful, even as the years thinned my circle. For a long time, I convinced myself that the quiet was safety. If I asked for nothing, demanded nothing, maybe no one would take from me again. I told myself peace was in the empty rooms, the unreturned calls, the nights when the only sound was the ticking of the old clock in the hall. But standing in the doorway earlier, staring at Adrian with his boxes and his cold words, I felt something break through that silence. It was the realization that what I had mistaken for peace was only absence, and absence leaves space for others to fill with their own wants. The silence I had lived with all these years wasn't protecting me anymore. It was daring someone else to take everything. I wasn't always alone in a quiet house. There were years when every corner rang with Adrian's voice, loud, insistent, demanding more than I sometimes thought I could give. But I always found a way. When he wanted to attend the private academy across town, I sold the gold bracelet my mother had left me. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the uniform fees and books. Later, when tuition bills arrived that my salary as a school secretary couldn't possibly cover, I worked evenings at the library and cleaned houses on weekends. My hands were blistered, my back stiff, but the checks cleared, And Adrian walked through those doors each morning, dressed like he belonged. I remember one summer when I longed to take him to the ocean. He'd never seen it, and I thought the memory might mean something. Instead, I used the money I'd saved for gas and lodging to buy him a new laptop, the one his guidance counselor said would give him an advantage. I told myself there would be other summers, other chances. They never came. My family praised him endlessly. Adrian is going places, they'd say at gatherings. The future of the family. The compliments flowed like wine, but they never reached me. I was just the one making it happen, invisible in the background, the afterthought who kept the machine running. When he brought home awards, my name wasn't on them. When he graduated with honors, no one mentioned the nights I stayed awake sewing buttons back on his shirts or calculating which bills I could delay to afford his textbooks. Now, watching him stride through my house as though it had always been his, I see the pattern clearly. He was raised to take, to expect to believe that every sacrifice was simply his due. And I, God help me, I let him. Because I loved him. Because I thought that love meant giving until there was nothing left. But standing in that silence, I realize there comes a point when a mother is no longer seen as a person, only as a resource. And Adrian had reached that point long ago. The first time Adrian came back after his father's funeral, I thought grief had softened him. He arrived on a gray afternoon with a paper cup of coffee in his hand, the steam curling into the cold air as he stepped inside. "Thought you might need this," he said, pressing it into my palms. It was the brand I liked, the one he used to tease me about for being too strong. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a while it felt almost natural. He asked how I was holding up, if the nights were lonely, if I had thought about traveling to visit cousins in Maine. His voice was gentle, almost tentative, and I caught myself studying his face, searching for the boy I used to know beneath the lines of a man. For the first time in years, I let myself believe he'd missed me. When he leaned back in his chair and smiled, I felt something ease in my chest. Maybe he finally understood. Maybe he'd seen how much I'd carried, and we could start again. I spoke too freely, telling him how the garden had been my company, how I still set out 2 cups in the morning, sometimes out of habit. He listened, nodding, even reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Then, as easily as if he were asking about the weather, he said, "So when are you planning to list the house? We talked to a realtor last week. She said a property this size could move fast." The words fell like stones. My hand slipped from his. His smile didn't falter. It stayed fixed. Polite, as though nothing cruel had been spoken at all. I realized then that every question, every soft word had been a lead-in, a mask to set me at ease before cutting me open. I looked at him and saw not a son reaching out, but a man rehearsing a script, practiced and deliberate. The warmth was never real. The betrayal had been planned long before he carried that cup to my door, and it hurt more than if he'd never come back at all. I once carried Adrian on my back through a snowstorm. He was 8, the bus hadn't come, and the school was somehow still open, and he had burst into tears at the thought of missing perfect attendance. So I wrapped him in a blanket, tucked his lunch into my coat pocket, and trudged through 2 feet of powder to get him to the front doors before the first bell. That night, I worked a double shift, first at the library shelving returns until close, then scrubbing the bathrooms at the community center after everyone else had gone home. My legs ached, my fingers cracked from the cold, but I remembered his smile that morning when he peeled off the scarf and said, "You're like a superhero." I held on to that. There were years like that. Quiet sacrifices. I never called them that, not then. They were just what you did for your child. When he applied to college, I took out a credit card I couldn't afford just to buy him a suit for interviews. When he got engaged, I sold the necklace my mother had given me, the only piece of real jewelry I owned, to help cover the down payment on the venue. He never asked where the money came from. He never asked if I had anything left. I remember standing in the back row of his wedding hands clasped, whispering to myself, one day he'll understand. One day he'll see what it took. But he never did. Instead, I watched the distance grow. First in the silences between calls. Then in the way his wife never made eye contact when they visited. Then in the realtor's card I found accidentally left on the hallway table. All the nights I'd fallen asleep sitting up sorting bills, patching school uniforms, writing grocery lists that didn't exceed $20. They meant nothing to him now. He lived in the comfort I built, but never once asked what it cost me to make it. And now he walked through my house like it had always been his. I walked into my own hallway and found Adrian's wife Mallory standing in the master bedroom with her phone out, the measuring tape stretched from wall to wall. She didn't even flinch when I stepped in. "Oh, good," she said, barely glancing at me. "We were just figuring out where to put the crib. This room gets the best light." She said it like a foregone conclusion, like I'd already agreed. I looked at the bed, my bed and the window, where I used to sit with morning coffee watching cardinals flutter in the trees. My robe still hung on the door. Adrian entered behind me, silent, arms crossed. He didn't look at me. He hadn't, not really since they showed up. "We figured you could move your little desk into the dining room," Mallory added, gesturing with her chin. "There's no reason for you to have this much space." "This much space." I said nothing. My silence stretched so long it made her uncomfortable, but not enough to stop. "You're not exactly hosting parties," she said with a short laugh. "And it's not like you have real family coming around. No grandkids you're raising, no spouse. It's just you. You don't even—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. Just me. Adrian still hadn't spoken, still hadn't told her to stop, still hadn't defended me, not as his mother, not even as a person. The thing about betrayal is sometimes it doesn't roar. Sometimes it stands in the corner with folded arms and says nothing while someone else breaks your heart. Something inside me shifted then. Not with tears, but with clarity. They weren't here to live with me. They were here to erase me. Every word was meant to shrink me down to the size of a guest, a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. And I wasn't moving my desk anywhere. I smiled. Not the kind they'd recognize, but the kind that comes right before you start building something sharp and quiet. Let them talk. I had already started preparing. That night, after the house went quiet and the lights in the hallway dimmed, I went to the coat closet, not to grab a sweater, but to reach for the small fireproof box hidden beneath the old rain boots. It was the only thing I'd taken with me when I visited the lawyer 7 years ago, just after Adrian married. Back then, I'd paid for their honeymoon and their down payment, thinking it would help them start strong. My lawyer had looked me in the eye and said, "You can love them, Calvera, but protect what you build, even from family." I opened the box now with steady hands. The deed was still there. My name, mine alone, etched in black ink on thick, embossed paper. The living trust, the will revisions, every legal thread stitched tight. Not a signature from Adrian. Not a clause left open. They could rearrange my furniture, but they couldn't erase my name. I took a deep breath and pulled out a yellow legal pad, began making notes. Then quietly, methodically, I called Joe Langley from 2 houses down, the retired contractor, who still owed me for helping his wife through chemo when the bills piled up. "Do you still have that security system hookup?" He did. By noon the next day, we had cameras installed on both entrances, a smart lock system on the back door, and reinforced the garage latch. Mallory thought I was just having repairs done. She didn't ask. She rarely asked anything. I didn't explain. I just let them settle in. I didn't challenge the way Mallory started stacking baby books on the kitchen island, or the way Adrian left his shoes by the door like this had always been his home. Let them feel comfortable. Let them feel safe. Let them believe I was too soft to stop them. I cleaned the file box, wiped it down, and slid it back beneath the rain boots right where it had always been. Then I waited. Because sometimes, real strength doesn't come with a scream. It comes with silence and a key they don't know you still hold. The church hall was buzzing with quiet conversation, the kind that floats between paper coffee cups and folding chairs. I was halfway through a conversation with Mrs. Hanley about seed catalogs when my phone buzzed in my pocket. One message. From Linda, my next-door neighbor. "Hey, I thought you were still at the community center. Your lights are on." And I saw movement through the kitchen window. "Everything okay?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't left anything on. I stepped outside the wind colder than I remembered and opened the security app. The footage was grainy at first, but then it came into focus. Adrian, standing at my back door with something in his hand. A tool. He wedged it into the lock and gave it a practiced twist. The door clicked open. Mallory followed behind him, arms full of boxes. The kids ran ahead like they were entering a hotel suite on vacation. She laughed, pointed toward the master bedroom. Adrian nodded and disappeared down the hall. I stared at the screen. My hand was shaking, but I felt oddly calm. I headed straight to the parking lot, got in my car, and drove home. The sky blurred past me. Trees, road signs, traffic lights. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my stomach twisted tighter with every mile. I didn't need to check the cameras again. I had seen enough. When I pulled into my own driveway there, it was my son's SUV parked like it belonged there. I cut the engine heart, hammering. I stepped inside. My living room was cluttered with boxes. A toy car rolled across the hardwood floor. My daughter-in-law's voice called out from the kitchen, asking someone where the mug should go. She didn't even glance my way. "You're early," Adrian said flatly. I looked at him. Looked at the life he was rearranging without permission. Then I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police," I said, voice calm. Adrian rolled his eyes. "Come on, Mom. Don't make this a thing." I didn't answer. I tapped the screen, and as they stood there, frozen mid-move, realizing I wasn't just going to disappear, I turned my back and stepped outside. Now I was ready. Let the law see what they had done. Red and blue lights lit up the street before I even stood from the steps. The officers arrived quickly, 2 of them. One older, one younger, both calm, professional. I met them at the curb with the folder pressed to my chest. Inside, the deed notarized and clear. My name. No one else's. This way I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They followed me up the path. Adrian was in the hallway halfway through, hanging a coat in my closet. He froze when he saw the uniforms. His face dropped not into fear, but irritation. Like we were an inconvenience. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, stepping forward. "This is family property." His wife appeared behind him, arms crossed, chin lifted. "She's alone. She doesn't even use half the rooms. This house shouldn't be wasted on one person." The younger officer turned to me. "Ma'am." I handed him the folder. He opened it, flipped through the documents, then looked back at them. "This house is hers. You're trespassing." Adrian's mouth opened closed. Mallory sputtered something about legal gray areas, about family rights. The officers didn't flinch. "You'll have to collect your things and leave," the older officer said. "Now." The silence stretched for a moment. Then Adrian exhaled sharply and turned. They moved through my home like strangers, no longer bold. Mallory shoved clothes into bags, muttering under her breath. The children watched from the stairs, confused. I stood in the kitchen while the officers supervised my hand resting lightly on the counter I had scrubbed every Sunday for 20 years. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Tired in a way that reached past the years, past the heartbreak, to something deeper. A kind of mourning For the boy I once held? For the version of me that once believed love was enough to keep people kind? They left without another word. No apology, no acknowledgement, just slammed car doors and silence. Patrick texted, "Did it happen?" I replied, "They're gone. But justice is quiet, and it doesn't always come with peace." The house was quiet again. Not silent in the empty way it had been when they first barged in, but quiet in the way a home breathes after it's been defended. I sat by the window with my morning coffee hands wrapped around the mug like an anchor, watching the wind roll across the tops of the trees. The restraining order had gone through without issue. The officers had reviewed the footage. The lawyer filed the papers. My name, my rights were protected now, not just by law, but by truth that could no longer be ignored or twisted. Word traveled fast in a small town like this. Adrian's bold entrance into my home, followed by his police-escorted exit, had made its rounds. Mallory's condescending remarks, once overheard in the grocery store, now repeated in whispers, didn't gain her any sympathy. People didn't say much to me directly, but they waved longer, stopped to hold doors, dropped off a few extra muffins from church. That's how support sounds here, soft, steady, without expectation. Patrick came by that morning with a bundle of freshly cut tulips in hand. "Thought the porch could use some color," he said, with a shy smile. He was always gentle with his words, never pushed for details. Just showed up when it counted. Like when he installed the locks without asking for anything in return. I took the flowers, arranged them in Grandma's old glass pitcher, and set them on the kitchen table, the table that for a few ugly days had been occupied by people who believed they had a right to everything I'd built. Not anymore. I stood in the doorway and looked at my home. Every corner bore my fingerprint. Every window framed a life I'd protected. And I thought of Adrian's words again. "You don't even have a family." I smiled to myself, letting the warmth of the coffee and the quiet pride settle in my bones. He was right. I don't have a family. I chose better.